Hello and welcome to the Farming Today This Week podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, the government's performance on the environment comes under scrutiny in two reports. Neither makes comfortable reading for DEFRA.
If they don't do something fast and something big, then they could well fail to meet the legally binding targets to turn around the decline in nature.
And milk's leap towards immortality.
So I'm picking up some savouriness, some sweet notes, bursting with creaminess, with all those lovely things happening behind it.
We'll be getting a taste of the UK cheese industry. Plus, the clear-up continues after Storm Goretti for rural businesses in Cornwall. Let's start, though, with those reports. The Office for Environmental Protection, the OEP, was set up 5 years ago to hold the government and other bodies to account. Its annual report, examining the government's progress on protecting and restoring nature, says it's not on track to meet 21 out of 43 legally set targets. It's not the first time the OEP has said the UK's environmental commitments are unlikely to be met unless action is swift. Richard Benwell is Chief Executive of Wildlife and Countryside Link, which represents 94 countryside and wildlife groups across Britain. He told Anna Hill that the government needs to take radical steps.
I don't think we should say they're going to fail yet, Anna. I think we're going to say that if they don't do something fast and something big, then they could well fail to meet the legally binding targets to turn around the decline in nature. And the reason? Well, we know there are all sorts of pressures on nature, don't we? Unsustainable agriculture is one of them. Heavy industry, land use change, overfishing. But there is still time for the government to meet its targets, but it needs to react with urgency and it needs to take this as seriously as it would, say, a serious economic shock.
Do the details show any particular part of nature recovery which is working less well than others?
There's progress in some areas, so we should flag that the government's been doing a good job on air pollution. But on biodiversity, on nature recovery, that's where we are most worried that at the moment the scale of response isn't anywhere near in proportion to the urgency of the crisis of turning around our decline. Farming has got to be at the forefront. We shouldn't just be playing around the edges of making do with a finite pot of funding. The government should be looking at driving forward revolution, change and a brilliant future for farming, because without it, we're definitely not going to meet those nature restoration targets. Or water quality, for that matter. That's going to be big this year, isn't it?
They've sent us a list of all the things it says it's already done, a revised environmental improvement plan, the largest nature-friendly farming budget in history, £11.8 billion to be spent across this Parliament, 2 new national forests, £1 billion spent on tree planting. I mean, there is a list of things that the government says it's already done and is doing.
Well, this is the perennial problem of nature reporting, that it ends up being long lists of stuff what we are doing, rather than a scientific look at what it would take to actually meet the targets. And I'm not pouring cold water on some of the good things that the government has done, but the question is it enough? And the answer from the OEP, the government's own watchdog, is that although there have been some good glimmers, we're still not taking the scale of effort or the speed of effort that would be needed to meet those targets.
Richard Benwell from Wildlife and Countryside Link. So, to the second report of the week. Outdated IT systems, staff shortages, and a government department not doing enough to support a joined-up approach. That's the Public Spending Watchdog's assessment of England's environmental regulation. The National Audit Office, the NAO, looked at how DEFRA, the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, works together with the Environment Agency and Natural England. The NAO report is one of a series of reviews into the bodies, and it says whilst they've made a good start, the scale of change required is substantial. The NAO report's director, Rich Sullivan-Jones, spoke to Kaz Graham.
There have been big reviews in the past year covering this area, particularly Dan Corrie's review of DEFRA's regulatory landscape, which had suggested that environmental regulation really needs to do a better job both at protecting nature and, while doing so, also supporting business and economic growth. The government largely accepted the recommendations from those recent reviews. So there's potentially a very large scale of change coming up, not just for those two regulators that we focused on in our report, but across really the whole of DEFRA's regulatory a sort of framework, which, a lot of opportunity for meaningful improvement, absolutely, but also some really big risks to DEFRA and its regulators being able to really manage all that change in a coherent way.
Yeah, and why is it such a big job? What are the barriers to successful reform?
Partly it's high complexity in the system. DEFRA is responsible for 3,000 pieces of legislation. There's overlapping areas of responsibility between different regulators. Outdated IT systems place quite big constraints on what the regulators can do, so those need to be replaced. The regulators themselves have struggled with recruiting and retaining key skills and expertise that they need. And, across 3 different reviews in the past year, there were 149 recommendations made. There's changes to the water sector that will affect the Environment Agency, changes to the planning system that will affect Natural England. There's just a lot to do.
Yeah, your report highlights a culture of risk aversion. Can you just explain what you mean by that and what the implications of that culture of risk aversion are?
A common theme in our work has been that innovation needs well-managed risk-taking. There have been some good changes and innovations that we've seen from DEFRA and from the regulators, but the prevailing culture for some time has been very cautious, preferring safe and low-risk options. And this has meant not always taking opportunities to try doing things differently. You certainly saw this need for a culture shift, really, and a more embracing of change.
DEFRA told us in a statement that it is making what it calls sweeping changes and that it's going to bring in new strategic plans for the Environment Agency and for Natural England. But you criticise DEFRA in this report for being reactive rather than following a clear strategy, and also for being slow to act. How confident are you that it will deliver what it's promising to do there?
I mean, I would say we're cautiously hopeful. There is opportunity, there is impetus, there's kind of political backing to it. So there is genuine scope for these, what DEFRA described as sweeping reforms. There is scope for that. And I think there is a real opportunity for DEFRA to embrace that and really take a more kind of coherent strategic approach going forwards.
Rich Sullivan-Jones from the National Audit Office. Now, cheese. It's something we've been focusing on this week in our sister programme, Farming Today. Personally, it's always a focus. There are reckoned to be at least 700 different varieties of British cheese. And as Susie Stannard from the industry body, the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board, told Anna, that means cheesemaking is an important destination for milk from our dairy farms.
Of that milk production, about 42% goes into liquid milk, about 20% for butter, yoghurt and other products, but about a third of that milk will go to make cheese. Broadly, it's the processors who will set the price which farmers receive, which will be based on different factors, but fundamentally what the markets are doing. So what commodity prices are worth, so how much butter's worth or how much cheese is worth, which will be really governed by global factors as well as sort of domestic milk supplies.
The latest figures that you have, the AHDB has, shows that exports of dairy produce have actually risen quite sharply, haven't they? 2024-25.
Yeah, we've seen a good rise, and there's been a few different reasons for that. One of the reasons has been because there's just been more milk. So over the last year, we saw really strong growth in milk production. So milk year to date, we were up about 5%.
Let's have a look at those exports. Where are we selling to?
Of all the cheese that we send abroad, about 3/4 of it goes to the EU. Ireland being the biggest market, so that's 40,000 tonnes went there. The Netherlands had 27,000 tonnes, and then France at 23,000 tonnes. Still our third biggest export market, despite any snobbishness about British cheeses.
And just one final question. If there's global oversupply of milk, consumers will be asking, why is the price of cheese going up in the shops?
We did some analysis looking at that actually in terms of price transmission, and what it found is that if you look at the commodity values and if you look at the prices in the shops, the two have a lag, quite a long lag of about 7 months. And actually the transmission between, say, if you got a drop in commodity values, the drop that you would then see in shops is actually quite small. So not all of that price is transmitting down to consumers.
Susie Stannard there from the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board. Wyke Farms in Somerset makes cheese which can be found on the shelves of several major supermarkets. Fiona Clampin met Managing Director Richard Clothier at Wyke Farms' milk reception area, where in peak season around 1 million litres arrives every day.
Most of our milk comes from within 30 miles of the dairy here. You'll see the tankers coming in and out. It's a real hive of activity here today because we're not normally this busy this time of the year. Normally spring is our busiest time of year, but the farmers are producing loads of milk. We'd normally be doing 5 days a week at the moment, but we're actually still doing 7 days a week. So the farm milk is up massively on last year, and we're processing milk as fast as we can, making as much cheese as we can to get through the milk.
And you say 7 days a week, is that 24/7?
Yes, it's 24/7, including washing and cleaning. So we clean once in every 24-hour cycle before we start making cheese again. But we have our own unique starter bacteria here to develop the cheese and the flavours that are unique to us. Those starter development is going on all the time.
And does quality control happen here as well?
Quality control is something that happens throughout the whole process, but yeah, we do test all the milk on arrival from the farms, test all the tankers, check all the temperatures and that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, my grandfather used to say you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, and it takes 10 litres of milk to make a kilo of cheese. So it has to be the local quality milk is absolutely paramount for making prize-winning cheddar, as it says above the door there.
I do like your sign there. Award-winning cheddar starts here.
Yes. Well, it actually starts on the farm, but
right.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a producer on a large scale of cheddar and other cheeses. I can't quite comprehend how the local farms can produce that amount of milk.
In global terms, we're a very small cheese maker, but yeah, in the southwest, we're a large cheddar maker, but this is one of the most dense milk regions in the whole of Europe.
So where are we going to go to next?
Well, I think we should go down to the cheese store and try some cheese. So we've seen the start of the process, and then we'll go to the end.
So we're in a kind of warehouse type thing, and it's just piled high with wooden boxes of cheese. How many boxes would you say there are in here?
Well, there's about 2,000 tonnes of cheese in here, in this store here. Once the cheese is made, it goes into these stores. We're just below room temperature in here, and the cheese is aging away in the wooden boxes, and our graders will go through and try the cheese as it's aging, and then when it's suitable for each individual market, then it's released for packing and sale.
Well, let's taste some, shall we?
Yes, let's try. We're going to open the boxes up. So this cheese is a little bit of a hybrid. We say it's the best things out of a double Gloucester and a red Leicester and a cheddar. So this is doing really well in some of the export markets. Just got it listed in a major retailer in the US. This has been locked away for over a year, this core of cheese. So you sniff it and it's releasing all of those interesting aromas.
Oh, yeah.
And so I push the cheese off the core off the iron a little bit, and we'll break a piece off. Would you like to try a piece?
Yep.
So I'm picking up some savouriness, some sweet notes, loads of creaminess, and some nuttiness as well. And that's exactly how people are looking for it in those markets. So bursting with creaminess, with all those lovely things happening behind it.
Rich Clothier at Wyke Farms there. How many of us are now thinking about cheese on toast for breakfast? As we heard there, UK-made cheese is in demand around the world. In 2024, exports were worth £887 million. Now, most of the cheese exported goes to Europe, and last year DEFRA announced that there would be an SPS deal, a sanitary and phytosanitary agreement between the UK and the EU. In theory, that will reduce administration on agri-food exports by aligning standards for farmed products. Negotiations on that are continuing. Marie Lennon has been finding out about the business of selling cheese to the world at exporters Coombe Castle with Director of Sales Ben Hutchins.
So we've got a small room here where we do labelling. We manage the labelling here with translations and get it ready for whichever market it needs to go to.
We've got a whole line of Stilton being labelled up. With the Stilton here, where could that be going off to?
I think this is going into Germany. We're seeing growth pretty much universally around the world. Even some of the markets where people might think we're having some challenges and that are difficult, USA being one with the tariffs, we're still seeing good growth. It all looks like it's moving in the right direction.
And you are exporting a whole range of different dairy products. What kind of markets are doing well? Where is there good demand?
Towards Asia, we've got very strong growth with our cream in Japan and Korea in particular, but generally across the whole region. And there is definitely a move with cheese as well. Australia is quite strong for us as well. We recently put Belton Farms products into Woolworths, and that's been followed by their product then going into the same retailers in New Zealand. So demand is good.
There were a few producers last year talking about still a huge amount of red tape to export into the EU. The government says they're making that easier with this SPS agreement. So how do you see things?
So the new SPS agreement will definitely help. We go through a number of processes. It's even worse if you do organic, which we do. We hear more about other people than us, but we have also experienced trucks being stopped at the border and waiting a couple of days while you try and resolve the problems with maybe something simple like a page number missing off a health certificate or stamp in the wrong place. I remember when we first started, people using the wrong colour ink was an issue, but as we come through we all learn, but there still are those issues which are all administration rather than just getting out and selling. So SPS agreement will definitely help reduce red tape.
And what about the US? It's been almost 9 months since new tariffs were announced by the US President Donald Trump. Is that starting to have an impact? Is it filtering down to the prices that you're seeing?
We haven't seen too much impact on retail prices yet, but we think that time is now. People have been holding stock, some people stocked up, and for a short period of time maybe some people cushioned their pricing into the market. But we're definitely seeing that going through. Yeah, retail prices are going to go up in the US as a result.
It strikes me that you're dealing with so much volatility, both with what your producers are able to do out in the fields because of weather being extreme at times, ever-changing markets, ever-changing global currency rates. What would make your life easier?
Price stability would be really good. This annual dance of, is it 45p for milk? No, now it's down to 35p for milk. Now it's back up to 45p for milk. If we could find a way of managing that, that would make everything a lot more simple. I don't know how a farmer deals with a 25% decrease in their income overnight. Yeah, it just staggers me.
Ben Hutchins from Exporters Coombe Castle with Marie Lennon there. Well, cheese made from cow's milk isn't the only story. In Carmarthenshire, Fraser Norton and Rachel Yarrow keep dairy goats and make cheese from their milk. Our reporter Marie-Claire Carey-Jones has been to follow the process from the goat shed to the shops.
We've got about 250 in total. Everything's in at the moment. Come the spring, they'll be going out on the pastures during the day.
And that's quite unusual for goats in the UK, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah. There's about 45,000 commercial goats in the UK, dairy goats. Almost all of those are usually permanently housed. But yeah, I'm kind of a bit obsessed with the idea of trying to make a similar model to what people do with cows, milking predominantly from grass and grazed grass, making that work with dairy goats.
What sort of a difference does grazing them on grass make?
Well, they say that 40% of the flavour of a cheese comes from the diet of the goats. I mean, it'd be hard to quantify that, I suppose. But I think for me, it's a lot about working with the seasons, working with what you've got around and doing that in sort of as an efficient and logical way as possible. This is our milking parlour. It's got 36 places.
It's very like a cow milking parlour, just on a much smaller scale.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's pretty much exactly the same, apart from goats have 2 teats rather than 4, so you have 2 clusters. Otherwise, very similar process.
And then when you finish milking in here, the milk goes somewhere else on the farm, ready to be made into the cheese?
Yeah, so it goes into the bulk tank, and then every second day we make cheese.
First thing we do when we enter the cheese is wash our hands. So this started life 2 days ago, just as milk. Basically, we added a starter culture and then added rennet. And then we ladle it into these draining bags that you can see hanging up here. And then on the 3rd day, we're taking the curd now, which is separated from the whey. We're adding some salt to it by hand, mixing it up. And then we're pressing it into those pyramid moulds. Tomorrow, we'll be unmoulding those. And after that, then they go into the maturing rooms, which is quite quick. We're talking about a matter of days and weeks.
You're making a soft cheese here, but you've recently started developing a hard goat cheese. Why have you done that?
Basically, that's to deal with the fluctuations in milk. You get a peak of milk production in the middle of summer if you do traditional kidding, which we're doing. And so that gives you a little bit of an issue because you've got peak milk just when demand for cheese drops off. So what people traditionally do in France and other European countries is they take that summer milk and make it into a harder cheese that you can mature for 3 to 6 months, and you sell the cheese in the winter months in the build up to Christmas when it's absolute peak demand.
Well, I've now come to Cardiff to meet Owen Davis, who runs Teak House, a cheese shop in the centre of the city.
There's so many different goat cheeses produced in the UK now, and they're lighter for people to digest, they're easier for digestion. So we've had a great increase in demand for goat cheese.
And you've put together a lovely cheese board in front of us with cheeses from the farm where I've been earlier today.
We've got the Cinnaden Hill, the Brightwell ash, which is coated in an ash coating, and then this is their new goat cheese at the end, which is soon to be launched this year. There's now more awareness of goat cheese. Often they're quite creamy. It kind of gives a good balance to the board.
Cheesemonger Owen Davis. Now, it's more than a week since Storm Goretti arrived, but the rural communities and businesses which found themselves in its path are still dealing with the consequences. The storm brought snow and heavy rain to some areas, and in Cornwall, the Isles of Scilly and the Channel Islands, it unleashed exceptionally strong winds. There were power cuts and severe damage to homes. Meanwhile, growers with greenhouses and polytunnels are left contemplating tangled wreckage, as Radio Cornwall's James Churchfield found at community veg grower Soul Farm near Falmouth.
Well, it's still very wet underfoot here at the premises for Soul Farm, overlooking Flushing and Falmouth. I'm with Abby Gwynn, who's part of the operation. Tell me what happened then here during the storm.
Well, to be honest, it was crazier than any of us expected. We had 5 new caterpillar tunnels up. They're kind of like a small version of a polytunnel. And every single one of them was decimated, totally crumpled by the wind. The plastic skin's blown off and ripped in half. And the metal framework, which is not flimsy by any means, totally crumpled like it was paper.
Yeah, and in fact, there is one of the structures right in front of me. That twisted nature of the metal, no sign of the polythene that was on top of it. And beneath it, crops that were obviously growing for your business.
Yeah, so under the 5 tunnels that we had up that have blown down, we've lost pretty much all the crops because the wind has just burnt them off entirely. And now they don't have any covering. They're going to be susceptible to the cold temperatures, the wind, the rain. In the winter, it's kind of terminal for these crops.
What does this mean for your business? Because you do a variety of things. You do produce boxes, you're at farmers' markets, you supply local restaurants as well. What does this mean for those people that you're hoping to serve, those customers?
Yeah, it means we're really lacking in our own produce at the moment. So our salad numbers, which is our core product really, they're having to go down. So at least for a few weeks, we're not able to wholesale to our local restaurant and shop customers. We can use a little bit in the veg boxes, but it really means we have a huge loss of income and we're having to buy in more produce from other local farms to kind of stem that gap in all of our enterprises.
How much is this going to cost to sort out?
Well, our estimates are it's just over £20,000, the cost of the damage, the damage to the tunnels and replacements, the loss of crops, the other repairs and the labour time needed to do all that. So, yeah, we've got a pretty big task on our hands. There's a real risk that we might not make it.
You have, though, had the most amazing support since words of this got out.
Yeah, so we actually launched a fundraising page on Monday, and to be honest, I've been entirely overwhelmed by the support.
So there's the financial support, but there's also the human endeavour. A lot of people are invested their time and love in this place. They volunteer for you. How have they been helping?
Oh, our volunteers have been incredible. We did quite an emergency kind of day on Saturday before more winds were coming on Sunday to try and take down the most kind of rickety of the tunnels that have been blown apart and collect all the plastic up that had been blown off. I did a shout out and we had about 12 people come along, and it it makes the phrase "many hands make light work" so true. We managed to get 2 tunnels down and all the stuff safe, and then we can assess what needs to be scrapped and what can potentially be reused for other things. So it's just amazing.
Abby Gwynn from Sol Farm near Falmouth there, sharing her experiences of Storm Goretti with James Churchfield. And that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Sarah Swadling. And Farming Today this week is a BBC Audio Bristol production.